Hey y'all. Today's video is sponsored by the ceaseless anxiety that surrounds me, binds me, and leaks through my pores at every waking moment. And I assume, while I slumber. A couple months ago, I released a video about Fox News demon Tucker Carlson after Glenn Greenwald decided to say that Tucker is some sort of right-wing socialist. I think you probably know how that video shakes out, but if you want the finer points and you missed it, go check it out. I'm bringing that up because today's video is another video about Fox News. Specifically, I want to talk about what I think might be the most incredible piece of content Fox News has ever released on YouTube. On May 3rd, the Fox YouTube channel published a video from a show or a segment of a show called Outnumbered. In this segment, there are 5 talking heads that basically spend the whole time enumerating any reason you can think of for why Fox News as an institution cannot be trusted. Honest to glob here, this video clip might be the truest form of, cosmic irony ever created.
Exactly.
The story the pundits are ostensibly discussing in this scene is about Rudy Giuliani's FBI investigation. For those that are unaware, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and NBC all reported on the fact that the FBI is investigating Rudy Giuliani. However, all of those news outlets reported something inaccurate. The feds told the reporters that wrote these 3 articles that Rudy Giuliani had been told by the FBI that he was under investigation. This was false. The truth is that at the time, the feds were planning to tell Rudy Giuliani that he was under investigation. Now, you may have noticed that this distinction between having told Rudy or planning to tell Rudy is a totally unimportant factoid. The meat of this story is that America's mayor is being investigated by the FBI.
What does that mean?
The reporting error here is that the word planned was left out of these news articles. An official government representative who was the source for these articles mistakenly told the reporters that the FBI had told Rudy about his investigation, not that they were planning to. The only thing that happened is that a single word was missing from these reports. I know I'm stressing this a lot, but it's important for where we're going here. So if you're like, that word being missing doesn't sound like a big deal at all, I would agree. But our dear friends at Fox have a different take. And that take seems to be that this minor mistake is indicative of everything wrong with the mainstream news today.
Look, there's an epidemic in American journalism, and it is anonymous sourcing, oftentimes the single anonymous source.
So what I want to discuss is how Fox News uses this segment on Outnumbered to distract viewers from the actual news story. But I also want to discuss how basically every point that each talking head makes in this segment explains everything wrong with how Fox News does the news. In our clip, we have a cast of characters who you may recognize or not, depending on how much Fox News you've been exposed to in recent years. But Fox is a place where facts play a very minor role, so in keeping with their tradition, I'm going to ignore the real names of everyone on this show and make up some new ones. For our purposes, their names shall be Flingus, Dingus, Dumpty, Badman, and that character from Will and Grace. The clip begins with our host, Dingus, setting up the segment by explaining that Giuliani is under FBI investigation. But, more importantly, the New York Times missed a word when they were reporting on this story. This mistake, and not the investigation, will be the topic for today.
Some big names in the mainstream media forced to retract an explosive story on Rudy Giuliani after reporting that the FBI had warned Giuliani he was the target of a Russia disinformation campaign. However, many other news outlets didn't even cover the retractions.
But now this is Fox News, and a woman has been talking for way too long now, so we gotta make sure our sole male pundit is the first one to express an opinion.
Karl Rove, your reaction.
Well, interesting. The allegation was that the FBI had told Giuliani and another news organization that they were targets of Russian disinformation.
We have hardly started this conversation, and already have we embarked on a mission to mislead. Badman opens by calling this report an allegation. I don't feel the need to break down how obviously incorrect or loaded that word is and how it has basically nothing to do with what they're talking about, though I suppose I just did. But Badman goes on.
The correction says that the FBI planned to. So we got a couple of questions here. Why, if the FBI was planning to, did they not? And second of all, who went out and told all of these news organizations something that was fundamentally inaccurate?
This is a stupid question, designed to distract the viewer from the utterly unimportant waste of time that is this segment.
We'll probably never know the answer to the second. We're unlikely to know the answer to the first, but I'd sure like to know why the FBI was thinking about doing it and then decided not to do it.
And Carl, I think there's also a third question you're not asking. Does any of this matter? Or is this just a media circus designed to distract you from the fact that Giuliani, the personal lawyer of the former president, is a corrupt saggy ballsack? We'll likely always know the answer to the second, and I'm sure every non-Fox viewer certainly knows the answer to the first. But what I'd like to know is, how do any of you sleep at night?
Once you've smeared somebody's reputation or once you've laid a piece of misinformation out there, it's awfully hard to remove it from the public psyche.
This is what I meant earlier in the video when I called this clip an incredible example of irony. Karl Rove is a man who enthusiastically supported and assisted President Bush in launching a 20-year-long war based totally on a lie. Having this guy talk about how difficult it is to hit the rewind button after you spread misinformation is truly a just chef's kiss level of shamelessness. But I suppose Badman is a great person to talk about spreading misinformation. His career is built on it, after all.
You know, Kennedy, I have a couple of questions. Why did they believe this source? And was it simply one source?
I don't know,
Was it not two or three?
Oh my gosh, Kennedy, I loved your work on Will and Grace.
Honey, so do I.
It could have been both the Michaels, Michael Avenatti and Michael Cohen, because they certainly have axes to grind with the former mayor of New York City as well as former President Trump.
All right, speculating right off the bat about who the source could be. Not really sure how it's answering the question, but let's just see where this speculation goes.
And just do the basic research. Do your homework. If you're getting a tip like that...
Wait, what? You were literally speculating about the possible source seconds ago, and now you're telling people to do their homework. It's truly next level impressive that this network has people talking this way, given how guilty Fox News is of spreading misinformation. And then to add to the irony, Will and Grace knockoff here is literally condemning the baseless kind of reporting that she is doing right now.
If you're getting a tip like that that could be defamatory, make sure you do the vetting so you don't have to go back and correct.
Notice how they have completely stopped mentioning the topic for this segment. Because the tip like that, which she is referring to, could never actually be interpreted as defamatory. Because this spooky tip is that the government mistakenly told reporters that they had told Giuliani he was under investigation. That mistake could only be considered defamatory if words didn't mean anything. And to bring it back home, they're not mentioning the topic anymore because this whole segment is a distraction from the topic. But these pundits don't want to talk about that, because then they'd have to talk about the actual crimes alleged, which might make people think that Giuliani committed some crimes. So instead, we're talking about a tip that could be defamatory. I mean, they're just getting so deep into the weeds here to avoid talking about the actual subject matter. And what are those metaphorical weeds? It's the normal Fox News fare. A bunch of talking heads telling their viewers that all media outlets, except Fox, are liars, but not Fox, and that this negligible mistake is somehow sinister. But Fox isn't. And to remind you again of what we're talking about here, unlike Fox would do, this whole shadoo began because 3 news outlets all reported that Giuliani was told he was under investigation, when in reality, the FBI was planning to tell him he was under investigation. But they just hadn't yet. This is on par with telling someone that, like, a tree leaf is light green, but in reality, it's lime green.
the most shameful thing about the cycle that we're in and these times that we're in, of course you want a big headline because you want clicks because that's how you make money. The former mayor may be in deep yogurt. We don't know. Just be patient and see what happens, and don't make stuff up, because when something real happens, people will not believe you.
Don't make stuff up. What wise words coming from Kennedy. You wouldn't want to tell people to think something or believe something that's patently false and or works against their own interests, now would you? Kennedy has never been guilty of spreading misinformation or sensationalist reporting.
All of Obamacare is immoral. All of Obamacare has resulted in human suffering.
Well, let's move on to our next head, Dumpty.
Look, there's an epidemic in American journalism, and it is anonymous sourcing, oftentimes the single anonymous source that ends up being wrong. And you see the corrections, and you're right, the corrections barely get any coverage. There's reputational damage for Rudy Giuliani and others. With this Axios poll that came out that said 92% of Republicans believe that the media intentionally reports false stories, and 79% of independents. That is an extraordinary number.
Wow. Almost like there's been a giant news network actively tearing down trust in the general news media to such a level that we don't even agree on what the truth is. Now, of course, what Dumpty's saying here is ironic to the nth degree, because this is Fox, a news organization, reporting on how Americans think the news is deceitful, but not Fox, of course, while distracting their viewers from the actual news story they're supposedly reporting on right now. You know, it's almost like Fox is engaged in some bad faith reporting here. Like, they're accusing other networks of the crimes that they themselves are guilty of. Like they're behind some kind of epidemic of lies and misinformation.
And Edelman researches the trust barometer, and this year they found that journalism is at its lowest point of trust.
Well, jeepers. I wonder why that could be. All right, well, Fox might have spent the last couple decades telling everyone to trust nobody but them. But Fox reporters wouldn't then turn around and misinform or lie to their viewers, would they?
The Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. That's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it, that's true. Democrats know if they keep up the flood of illegals into the country, they can eventually turn it into a flood of voters for them. When you offer someone citizenship, free health care, free education, housing...
Oh, yeah! I almost forgot how this single clip on Fox's own YouTube channel literally spells out every reason their network is not to be trusted.
Because that's how you make money.
And one quick thing, because I think it's worth rewinding and pointing this one out.
You see the corrections, and you're right, the corrections barely get any coverage. There's reputational damage for Rudy Giuliani and others with that nuance there.
Reputational damage. This is a man who fell from the heights of being America's mayor after 9/11 to a shitbag sexual assailant in Borat 2. There's no way to damage this Rudy's reputation more than he can already do all by himself. And so we don't forget what these bozos are trying so hard not to talk about. This whole segment is discussing the fact that the New York Times, the Washington Post, and NBC all accidentally misreported that Giuliani had been told he was under investigation, when in fact the government was planning to tell him he was under investigation. I'm bringing this up constantly because it isn't a story worth having a whole segment about, obviously. And the fact that they have all but ceased talking about the real story here, the FBI investigation, I think is pretty damning. And that's outside of the fact that for some reason they are spending this segment instead talking about everything wrong with their ethics as reporters and a news network. But now to our last talking head, the great legal mind of Flingus.
I come to you, Emily, because inside of a courtroom, I would imagine it's like you make mistakes, everybody makes mistakes. But how did they all get on the same song sheet? Do they all have the same single source? It gets confusing to me. And why would that ever be enough?
Right, and to pick up where my colleagues left off, I mean...
Ignoring the question entirely, Emily goes on to talk about juries, which are not relevant here. The question was, why do these three news outlets have the same source? The answer to that, because no one on this show is going to tell you, is that the source is the government. When the government tells you what they're doing, it's an official statement. It doesn't need to be corroborated the way other stories do, where your sources are not official sources. This also isn't like a cover-up. This is just the government saying, we're investigating someone. You don't need a backup source for that. It's an official source, so that's already good, and it's talking about something that in no way would anyone benefit from that being a cover-up or a lie. So why would you get a second source? The answer is, you wouldn't. But of course, we can't forget the incredible and incredibly ironic end to this whole segment. Flingus goes off on how misinformation in the news can taint juries and have an outsized negative effect on society.
And think about how many motions to dismiss are filed or motions to move venues are filed for trials where the defense counsel is arguing that the juror pool is tainted because of all the coverage, right? Well, imagine if that coverage was wrong. And imagine if the jury pool never saw the corrections. And you're talking about national media outlets. Exactly.
And I shouldn't have to spell out for you why this is hypocritical and ironic, but I will. Fox News has spent years now misleading the public on information about mask wearing during the pandemic.
So the next time you see someone in a mask on the sidewalk or on the bike path, do not hesitate. Ask politely but firmly, would you please take off your mask?
On how white nationalism is destroying our country, which it is, but Fox News just seems confused on what white nationalism even is.
The whole thing is a lie. If you were to assemble a list, a hierarchy of concerns, of problems this country faces, where would white supremacy be on the list? Right up there with Russia, probably. It's actually not a real problem in America.
And of course, they've misled their viewership on what Black Lives Matter protests are even about, trying to make the desire to be treated like an equal citizen out to be some pro-violence, pro-totalitarian mess, which it just obviously isn't that. But if the only way you interact with Black Lives Matter is via Fox News, that'll be what you are misled to think. One has to wonder how many juries they have tainted over the past several years.
Exactly.
Exactly, Flingus. Exactly. Ooh, if you liked this video, give it a big old thumbs up, hit that subscribe button so you can watch more videos from me, and leave a comment below. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, yada yada yada. More importantly, watch one of the videos that's about to pop up on screen before I disappear into the black. Oh no! Ah!